In the heart of a green land, where time seemed to run slower, he lived an old farmer named John. His life was a fabric of simple routines, sown with the morning sun and the smell of the wet earth. One day fate has placed an orphan, trembling and fragile calf, rejected by her herd after delivery. John, whose hands were heated by work but whose heart remained soft, could not turn his back. He welcomed him, fed him with a bottle and gave him a strong name to compensate for his initial fragility. Thunder. That little gesture of compassion was the seed of a friendship that would flourish in an extraordinary way, challenging the logic and conventions of the countryside, uniting a man and animal in a way that few could understand. The connection between John and Thunder deepened with each sunrise, becoming a bond that transcended the common relationship between a creator and his cattle. Thunder was not just an animal on the farm. He was the shadow of John, a silent companion in all his journeys. The calf, which grew strong and imposing, followed the old farmer throughout the property, from the pastures to the balcony of the house. John talked to him, shared his thoughts and silences, and the great bull seemed to understand each word, responding with a soft look and calm presence. They developed their own language, made of gestures, sounds, and a mutual confidence that was the silent envy of those who watched them from afar, witnessing a pure and unshakable link. In the small rural community, the friendship between man and bull was a recurring theme of conversations, often tinged with strangeness and mocking. Other farmers, pragmatic and hardened by Leda, saw John's dedication as an eccentricity, a foolish sentimentality to an animal that, for them, was just commodity. He treats the animal like people, whispers in the local warehouse. John's wife, Maria, at first shared a certain reserve, worried about her husband's attachment. However, over time, she began to see the depth of that affection, the way the company of Thunder had a serene light in John's eyes, and her skepticism became a tender and accomplice acceptance of that singular relationship. However, the tranquility of that life was shaken by a relentless and invisible force. A severe drought dried down on the region, turning the green fields into a dust and despair rug. The harvests withered under the scorching sun, the sources of water dried and cattle began to weaken. John fought with all his strength to keep his farm, his little world. Debts accumulated as storm clouds on the horizon, and the bank pressure became an overwhelming weight on their tired shoulders. He sold some cows, then the sheep, but the crisis was an insatiable monster, and with each passing day, the financial siege was more cruelly and inescapable, threatening to bring everything he built. The day came when reality imposed itself with the power of a blow. The bank manager, with a voice devoid of emotion, gave John an ultimatum. Either he paid the substantial debt left, or would lose the farm. The only solution, the only hope of salvation, lived in the most valuable good he had, Thunder. The fragile calf had become a magnificent bull, a pure and invaluable value on the market. The idea of selling his friend was a knife to pierce John's soul. The nights became a torment of insomnia. His heart wore a battle between love and responsibility, and the image of Mary's face, worried, haunted him. The decision was a poison, and he knew that whatever his choice, a part of himself would die. The day of sale dawned gray and lifeless, as if heaven himself was in mourning. Buyers arrived in a noisy pickup truck, businessmen with cold eyes who evaluated Thunder not as a living being, but as a set of pounds and muscles. His indifference was a brutal contrast with John's silent agony. The process of driving Thunder to the truck ramp was a ritual of torture. The great bull, usually so docile, seemed to feel the betrayal in the air, resisting gently, his dark eyes fixed in John, a silent and painful question hovering between them. Each step that Thunder took toward the truck was one step toward an abyss that opened in the heart of the old farmer. At the end, when the truck bars were about to close, John approached a last farewell. He leaned his forehead in his massive Thunder, tears running freely through his bound face. He whispered promises of reunion that he himself knew to be empty, asked for forgiveness in a murmur that was lost in the sound of the engine. The truck left, raising a cloud of dust that swallowed the image of his friend, leaving behind only the void and the silence. John remained motionless on the road, an empty man, looking at nothing, feeling the weight of his decision crushing his spirit. The echo of Thunder departure would resonate in his soul for many, many years. The farm, saves from the financial ruin, has become a mausoleum of memories. The bank's money was paid, but at a cost no currency could measure. The sound of Thunder's heavy steps, his gentle mute in the morning, his constant presence next to John, all this disappeared, leaving a silence that shouted louder than any noise. John became a shadow of himself, moving through his daily tasks with mechanical accuracy, his gaze lost in a distant horizon. Joy had been torn from his life, and his heart, once full of unlikely love, now sheltered a cold, desolate hole that nothing seemed to be able to fill. Mary tried, with gestures of affection and words of comfort, to reach her husband in the exile of her pain, but the wound was too deep. The farewell of Thunder was not just the loss of an animal, but the loss of a vital part of John's identity. The story of his friendship has become a melancholy legend in the village, a whispered tale over the farmer who sold his soul to save his land. The chapter of life they shared ended in such a deep and resonant note that it seemed to have stained forever the colors of John's world, leaving him to drift in a sea of longing and repentance. The years have passed as silent stations, each bringing their own harvest with them, but none capable of filling the void left by Thunder. The farm prospered, the debts were a distant memory, but John's soul remained in a perpetual winter. He had aged, his shoulders bent not only by the weight of age, but by the burden of longing. Each bull that crossed his way was a ghost of the lost friend, every muddled in the distance a stab of memory. In his wallet, he kept a spent and yellowish photograph of a trembling calf, a talisman of a time when his happiness was simple and complete, a sacred relic of his lost love. His pain, over time, metamorphosed on a mission. The search for Thunder began shyly, with discreet questions to cattle traders and travelers. He attended auction markets, not to buy or sell, but to look. With old photography in hand, he approached strangers, describing his friend with precision that only love can check. Many looked at him with pity, others with disdain. "A bull is just an old bull," they said. "1,000 out there." His search was seen as the madness of a man clinging to a ghost, a quixotic battle against oblivion and the inevitability of loss. The search became a pilgrimage, an obsession that consumed his days and his economies. John traveled to distant lands, following the fresh rumors, the most unlikely clues. Each dusty road, every unknown farm, was a new chapter of hope that, most of the time, ended in disappointment. He neglected his own farm, leaving Mary in charge, her heart divided between her husband's concern and admiration for her unshakable loyalty. Each dead end was a fresh wound, but the image of Thunder eyes on the day of the farewell was driving it forward, a lighthouse in its darkness. In this lonely journey, his life crossed with a myriad of souls. He found dishonesty in the eyes of traders who promised him false information in exchange for money, and indifference to those who had no time for an old man's pain, but also found goodness in unexpected places. Other men in the countryside, who also knew the language of loss, shared with him their stories, a bread and a glass of wine. It was these small islands of compassion that kept it out, gestures of strangers who, for a moment, saw beyond their apparent madness and recognized the universality of their pain and their search for redemption. One day a dark rumor came to his ears, a whisper that froze his blood. A man told him that bulls with the strength and beauty of Thunder were often sold to a much more cruel destination than the slaughterhouse. The bullfights. The idea of his gentle friend, who barely knew evil, to be forced to fight for life for the entertainment of a crowd, filled him with overwhelming dread. His search gained a new meaning, a desperate urgency. It was no longer just longing. It was a rescue, a race against time to save Thunder from a destination of violence and suffering. He began to attend the arenas, from the smallest and slightest in the remote villages to the best known in the cities. The festive atmosphere, the loud music, the applause of the crowd, all disgusted him deeply. For him, it was a theater of cruelty disguised as tradition and art. Each time the gates opened to free a new bull, his heart stopped for a moment. He persisted every animal, desperately looking for a sign, a brand, a familiar look. In every frightened and furious bull that entered the sand, he saw the reflection of his own fear and impotence, praying that none of them were his friend. Maria, who initially feared her husband's sanity, became her greatest ally. Through occasional letters and phone calls, she sent her not only the money he needed, but also the strength to continue. She understood that John's search was not for an animal, but for her own peace, for the healing of a wound that time could not close. "Find him, my old man. He brings our boy back home," she said, her voice a balm to her tired soul. His unconditional support was the anchor that prevented him from losing himself completely in his pain and apparently impossible demand. And then, when hope began to fade, a light emerged in the darkness. In a small tavern near a bullring, an old animal handed, hearing John's description, stopped and thought. He remembered such a bull, with a distinct white spot on his left eye, an animal of a legendary force, but with a strange docility in his moments of calm. He told John that this bull, now known by another name, had been bought by a famous businessman in the capital, a man who only acquired the best and fiercest animals for the largest shows in the country. It was the most concrete track Joao had in years. With a determination forged in the fire of years of searching, John made a drastic decision. He sold a small part of his lands, enough to finance his trip to the capital and his stay. It was his last card, the culmination of an odyssey moved by love and longing. He left, an old farmer against the world, on a mission that for many was crazy, but for him was the only reason to live. He was going to find thunder, no matter the price, no matter how unlikely it was. He would not come home without his friend, alive or dead. His journey was reaching his climax. The capital was a monster of concrete and noise, a universe of speed and indifference that violently contrasted with the serene rhythm of John's life. He felt like a fish out of water, an anachronism amid frantic modernity. In front of him, he rose to Monumental Plaza, the largest bullring in the country, a modern coliseum dedicated to an old ritual of blood and sand. With the bullied ticket in his trembling hand, he crossed the gates, feeling small and insignificant, a lonely pilgrim entering a temple that could be the stage of the greatest joy or deeper tragedy of his life. Finding his place in the crowded stands, the atmosphere of collective excitement weighed on him like a shroud. The sound of the trumpets echoed, a ceremonial announcement that made its stomach turn. The killer, dressed in his light costume, entered the arena under a resounding ovation. The crowd roared in anticipation, thirsty for the spectacle, Dance with Death. For John, every applause was a nail in a coffin, every scream of "Olé," an insult to life. He was there not as a spectator, but as a witness, perhaps a crime about to be committed against his own heart. The afternoon dragged on a succession of bullfighting. One bull after the other entered the arena, faced his destination and fell under the sword of the killer. With every animal that fell, part of John's hope died too. The fear of finding thunder was almost as great as the fear of not finding it. He saw the brutality of that art, the forced courage of animals and the calculated coldness of men. She felt a stranger in her own country, a silent dissident in the midst of a celebration of death that her soul refused to accept. So the moment froze. The herald announced the last and most anticipated bull of the night, a live legend in the arenas, an animal of unparalleled ferocity, feared by all killers. His war name was Fury. When the large wooden gates opened, time stopped to John. His heart failed a beat. The air fled him from his lungs. Entering the arena, imposing, majestic and terrifying, it was thunder. The scars marked his body. The years had given him an even more powerful dimension, but the white spot on his left eye, his birthmark, shone like a lone star in darkness. Thunder, or Fury as it was now known, erupted in the arena as a contained rabies gale. It snorted, hit the paws in the sand, a perfect symbol of wild fury. But his eyes, for those who knew how to read beyond superficial anger, told a different story. There was a deep confusion in them, an old fear, and a sadness that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. John, hundreds of meters away, felt his friend's pain as if it were his own. He saw not the beast that the crowd saw, but the victim, his lost partner, imprisoned in a nightmare of violence and loneliness. The killer, a young man famous for his arrogance and dexterity, began his provocative dance, shaking the red crutch to incite the bull. Thunder invested with an explosive force, but his attacks lacked the murderous intention of the previous bulls. There was a hesitation in his movements, a reluctance to injure, as if his kind nature still struggled against the brutal conditioning to which he was subjected. The crowd, intoxicated by danger, applauded frantically, blinds to the nobility and internal conflict of that magnificent animal that fought not only against man but against himself. John couldn't stand it anymore. In an impulse moved by despair and love, he made the unthinkable. Ignoring the warning shouts and the shocked glances around him, he jumped the protective barrier, falling into the security passage surrounding the arena. His body hurt, but his soul was on fire. With all the strength of his lungs, he began to scream, his hoarse and embargoed voice echoing through the silent square. "Thunder! Thunder, my son! It's me, Thunder!" It was a cry that torn the fabric of the reality of the arena, an invocation of a past of peace in a war gift. The great bull, in the midst of a furious onslaught against the killer, stood abruptly, patching his paws into the sand. His massive head turned toward that voice that seemed to come from another time, from another world. The killer, caught by surprise, retreated. The crowd stuck, its collective roar turning into a whisper of astonishment. What was happening? Thunder completely ignored his tormentor and focused his gaze in the fragile figure of the old man who clung to the barrier, his face bathed in tears. The impossible was happening before his eyes. And then his eyes crossed. In that fraction of a second, the years of separation, pain, fear, and fury dissolved. In the eyes of the great bull, a glow of recognition, grooved, a spark of ancient affection, the memory of green pastures and a kind hand. For an eternal moment, he was no longer Fury, the arena's indomitable beast, and became Thunder again, the loyal friend of an old farmer. In that look, a bridge was built on an abyss of time and suffering, and fate, which seemed sealed, was suddenly put into question by an older and powerful force than any tradition: love. The silence in the monumental plaza was so dense that one could almost play. Thousands of people arrested their breath, their eyes moving from the Atoni killer to the old intruder, and to the bull that remained motionless in the center of the arena. The killer, feeling his authority and the control of the spectacle to collapse, gestured furiously so that the guards would remove John. But Thunder, the great Thunder, did not move. His body was a mountain of tension, but his gaze was fixed on the man who continued to call his name, his voice a bomb in the chaos. Challenging all the rules and instincts of the arena, Thunder took a slow and deliberate step toward John. Then another. It was not an onslaught, but a cautious, almost reverent approach. A collective murmur of unbelief swept the benches. A bull with the killer turning his back on the killer, ignoring the threat of the crutch, was something he had never seen. It was a breach of protocol, a heresy against the god of bullfighting. It was, for those who wanted to see, the irrefutable proof of a loyalty that even years of brutality managed to erase. John, seeing his friend's answer, gained courage. It began to walk slowly through the security passage, always keeping the visual contact. Your voice a continuous flow of sweet words and shared memories. He spoke of his farm, the shadow of the great fig tree where they used to rest, from Mary who waited for them at home. His words were a spell, making a cocoon of peace around them, isolating them from the thirst for blood of the crowd. He was not talking to a dangerous animal. He was calming an old friend who had lost himself and finally found his way back. The killer, with injured pride and his performance ruined, tried desperately to recover the bull's attention. He shook the cover with violence, shouted insults, tried to provoke the beast that knew how to exist within fury. But it was useless. Thunder was in another world, a world where he only existed and John's family voice. He continued his slow walk to the wooden barrier that separated them and, in a gesture of overwhelming tenderness, leaned his huge head in the wood, as close to his owner, his savior. The attitude of the crowd began to change. The initial shock gave way to a wave of emotion that spread through the benches. People began to understand that they were witnessing something unique, a moment of pure magic that transcended the show. Voices dropped, mobile phones were erected to record, not violence but that act of sublime love. They were seeing the stripped truth of all art, the the beauty of a connection that even imminent death could break. Respect began to replace bloodthirst. With tears to blind him, John reached through a space in the barrier and touched his friend's face. Its fingers traced the family scar from white spot, a gesture that had repeated thousands of times in the fields of your farm. Thunder closed his great eyes and emitted a low, deep sound, a contentment of contentment that vibrated through the wood and the heart of John. At that moment, the noisy arena, the killer and the crowd disappeared. They were again at home, the man and the bull, gathered against all the odds, in his own sanctuary of peace. From the high tribunes, the entrepreneur who had bought Thunder watched the scene, his face a mask of astonishment that slowly turned into a shrewd smile. He was a businessman, and what he saw was not just a moving reunion, but a much larger show than any bullfight. He saw the story, the legend, the newspapers the next day. He realized, with crystal clear clarity, that saving the life of that bull would be the greatest and most lucrative act of his career. Compassion at that time was also the best deal. The killer, finally understanding that he had lost his protagonism and his dignity, made a gesture of defeat. He threw his sword to the sand, an act of symbolic surrender, and turned his back, abandoning the arena under a mixture of boos and applause. He could not kill that animal. Not after that. And then something wonderful happened. The crowd, as if moved by a single heart, began to shake white handkerchiefs, the traditional request for the pardon, the forgiveness of the bull. They no longer wanted death. They wanted life. They wanted that amazing story to have a happy ending. The president of bullfighting, the maximum authority of the event, a man traditionally severe and attached to the rules, hesitated for a moment. But as he looked at the arena, the old man crying and the bull comforting him, hearing the unison of the crowd, his heart softened. He raised an orange scarf, the sign of forgiveness. Thunder's life was officially spared. The square exploded in a deafening roar, a collective catharsis of joy and relief. It was not a man's victory over the beast, but a victory of love over tradition, of loyalty over death. It was a moment that would be forever recorded in history. The news of the pardon of Fury, the bull that recognized its former owner, spread across the country and the world with the speed of lightning. Big newspapers of great circulation printed the photograph of João and Thunder on the first page. Television stations interrupted their schedule to report the extraordinary event. The image of the old farmer to caress the giant bull in the arena has become an instant icon, a powerful symbol of compassion, loyalty, and deep connection that may exist between different species. Their story touched a sensitive rope in collective consciousness, resonating far beyond the boundaries of the world of bullfighting. John, overnight, was transformed from an anonymous and stubborn farmer into a popular hero. Animal rights defense organizations celebrated their act, seeing it as an unexpected ambassador of his cause. Invitations rained for public interviews and appearances, but John, with his disarming simplicity, refused most of his attention. "I didn't do anything special," he said. "I just wanted to find my friend." His humility and the purity of his intention only increased the admiration that the audience felt for him, making his story even more captivating and genuine. The businessman, faithful to his opportunistic nature, wasted no time. He organized a press conference to announce the official reform of the arena's Thunder. It promoted the transportation of the bull back to the farm of João as a major media event, a gesture of generosity that earned him immensely positive publicity. For the world, it was a master's move in public relations. For John, however, it was the only thing that mattered. His long and painful search had finally arrived to the end. His friend, his Thunder, was returning home to the place to which he belonged. The return of Thunder to the small village was an unprecedented event. The whole community, including those who once moved by John's attachment, gathered to welcome the legendary bull. The children waved, the adults applauded, and there were tears in the eyes of many. They did not only see an animal to be discharged from a truck. They saw a symbol of hope, a living proof that love and loyalty can, in fact, operate miracles. John's farm is no longer just a piece of land to become the sanctuary of a living legend. The presence of Thunder transformed the day-to-day on the farm. The site has become a pilgrimage point for people of all ages and from all corners of the country. They wanted to see with their own eyes the bull who had been saved by love. They wanted to hear the story told by John himself. The old farmer never marketed his fame. He received everyone with a tired smile and an open heart, sharing his story not to boast, but to plant a seed of compassion in the hearts of his visitors, always advocating more kind and respectful treatment to all living beings. The impact of what happened at Plaza Monumental reverberated in the corridors of power and society. The story of John and Thunder gave a face and soul to the debate about bullfighting, which until then was often abstract and polarized. Forced people to confront the reality of animal suffering in a personal and emotional way. The image of that reunion has provided a powerful counterattack on the idea of bullfighting as a noble battle between man's courage and the beast's fury. It showed the vulnerability, intelligence, and ability to feel of the animal. In the following years, the legacy of your friendship began to take shape in concrete changes. Inspired by their history, activists have gained a new breath and public opinion began to change more decisively. Several regions of the country approved laws that restricted the cruel practices of bullfighting, and some cities even prohibited them completely. The history of Thunder Pardon was often cited as a turning point, the moment when society began to look at the arena animals not as symbols, but as individuals entitled to life and compassion. John and Thunder have spent their last years together, in the peace of his farm. The old and the bull, two twin souls that the destination united, separated and returned to unite in a miraculous way. Its afternoons were passed in the shadow of the old fig tree, in a silent communion that did not need words. They were a monument alive to their own history, a serene legend that breathed the fresh air of the countryside. His friendship was a lighthouse, a silent lesson about the strength of love. When John died of old age, Thunder felt his loss in a deep and visible way. The great bull spent days lying next to the place where his friend had been buried, a loyal guardian to the end. His pain was the final testimony of the depth of his connection. Their story, however, did not die with them. It was told and read from parents to children, a real fable about the gesture of love of a simple man for an animal not only saved a life, but also helped turn the heart of a nation. The moving narrative of John and Thunder broke the geographical and cultural barriers, becoming a contemporary fable celebrated around the world. Its story has been translated into dozens of tongues, shared on social networks and online forums as an antidote to cynicism, a headlight of hope in dark times. She spoke to a universal need for connection, resonated with the latent belief that love, in its purest form, can really challenge logic, overcome insurmountable obstacles, and rewrite a destination that seemed to have been carved in stone. It was a story that belonged to all. His journey was immortalized in children's books, with illustrations that captured the tenderness of its beginning in the green pastures and the tense drama of their reunion in the arena. These works not only told a beautiful story, but also became pedagogical tools to teach the new generations valuable about empathy, the importance of loyalty and the courage necessary to defend our convictions, even if it means being alone against the crowd. John's Love and Thunder has become a life lesson for children around the world. The audiovisual industry was soon recognized the power of its history. Award-winning documentaries were produced who gathered the testimonies of the people who lived that historic day. The killer, now an older and reflective man. Spectators whose lives were touched. And of course the ever-present Mary, the guardian of her husband's memory. These works analyzed the profound social and cultural impact of the event, exploring how a single act of love could trigger a wave of change. The reunion was dissected, analyzed, and celebrated as a defining moment. Inevitably, the story has reached the big screen, adapted in a big-budget movie that has become a box office success and criticism. The poignant drama was able to capture the emotional essence of John's journey, causing the audiences around the world to cry, rejoice, and fall in love with that old farmer and his noble companion. The film has gained awards at international festivals, further solidifying the status of John and Thunder as global icons of compassion and interspecific friendship. Your case has become a point of reference in academic and philosophical discussions. Ethicists and thinkers have used their history to discuss topics such as animal consciousness, the sentiency in non-human beings, and the moral responsibility of humanity towards the other life forms with which we share the planet. Thunder is no longer just a bull. It was elevated to a case study status, a catalyst for a deep reflection on our place in the world and our obligations to the most vulnerable. To ensure that your legacy was practically endured, a foundation was created with its names. This organization is dedicated to the rescue of fifth victims of abuse and the promotion of more human and sustainable agricultural practices. John's Own Farm was transformed into a memorial and educational center, a place where people can go to connect with nature and learn about the story that made that piece of sacred land. The spirit of your friendship is still alive to inspire concrete actions of kindness. In the capital, not far from the bullring where the destination was rewritten, a royal bronze statue was erected. The sculpture represents John with his hand in gently in the head of thunder, his fixed looks in each other, capturing the moment of reunion and recognition. The monument became one of the most visited places in the city, a place for silent contemplation, a permanent reminder of the transforming power of love. Tourists and places take photographs, leaving flowers at the base of the statue. Its influence was such that it infiltrated popular language. In some circles, the expression "making a John" has become a synonym for an act of unexpected courage and compassion in the face of cruelty or indifference. Their names together have become a code for unbreakable loyalty, a shortcut to describe the kind of love that does not know barriers, that makes no distinctions and that lasts beyond life itself. In the end, the story of a humble farmer and his pet bull evolved into something much bigger. It became a modern myth, a legend that was rooted in the global collective consciousness. It is a timeless tale that serves as a powerful reminder that compassion is a universal language, that courage can be found in the simplest hearts, and that love, in its true and most altruistic form, not only does not know the limits of species, but also has the sublime power of changing the world, one heart at a time. He raised him like a son, a kind giant who knew only the affection of his hands. But life separated them in the cruel way, selling library by coins. Years later, in a noisy blood arena, an old man shouted a forbidden name, waiting for a miracle. What happened next was not just a reunion. It was an act that challenged death, silenced a crowd, and turned a man and his bull into an immortal legend. Are you ready to find out how a friendship can rewrite fate?